in Brown's edition, which is one of the earlier neighborhoods of the city. J.J. Brown himself, who the neighborhood is kind of named for, lived just down the way. The Campbells had this home built in 1898 by a fellow named Kirtland Cutter, who's a pretty well-known architect around Spokane here. A lot of people recognize him from the historic Davenport Hotel project. For people like Kirtland Cutter, that revival is the important word. They were really looking at pre-industrial eras and cultures, different parts of the world, and pulling inspiration from that for not just the exterior of the house, but also every room in here is designed completely uniquely and to reflect a different time, a different part of the world. And that was not an accident. They wanted to explore what these different cultures would have had, and also maybe make you seem a little more well-traveled than you necessarily are. Some of the things that we take for granted now would have been pretty fancy to have quite the volume of in a house like this when you built it at the time. I mean, electric lights everywhere, that was pretty recent, and you'll notice them not just on the family side, but on the working side of the house as well. And so everywhere you see a bulb throughout the house, there originally was one, though a little bit brighter than they likely would have had them. We also have call button system that during the restoration they got to completely work again, which is good fun, as well as a telephone that was built by the front door. And I always tell school kids it's my only secret door because they wanted it to feel like a medieval castle. When you came through that front door, you can't have anything as modern as a telephone. So slides quietly away behind a little panel.
So Campbell House was built in a really interesting time for Spokane and for the Pacific Northwest. And it's really illustrated really well in the different kind of lives and stories of Grace Campbell and Helen Campbell. So Grace was more from this Victorian era where there were certain standards for women of their class. And then Helen was much younger and she was out doing sports and camping and things like that. And kind of along the same vein, this house was built at this time when things were changing from gas power to electric and from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles. And actually we have a great illustration of that in our carriage house, which is called the carriage house, because it was built to house a carriage with a horse. But by the time they were really in here, maybe barely even used for a carriage. And so there was this transfer from the carriage driver to the chauffeur who would drive your automobile, which interestingly may have even been electric at the time.
The Campbells lived here until 1924, so it was just Mr. Amasa Campbell, Ms. Grace Fox Campbell, and their only child, their daughter Helen. And they were here those 26 years, at which point Mr. and Mrs. Campbell had both passed away. Helen was married with a home of her own and didn't need this one necessarily when it was left to her. And she was a member of the Historic Society and the Art Society here in Spokane, so she knew they were looking for more formal building space. And so she donates it in honor of her mom, and we originally opened as the Grace Campbell Memorial Museum. Because when it was the museum, I mean, the house was only 26 years old. They painted, they built walls, put up beautiful exhibits all over the place. So kind of steadily working and all the research, I mean, 15 layers of wallpaper and paint down to find the original and really confirm what existed there. Kind of a 20-year or so effort to get it arguably restored. It was definitely an effort to get it looking quite like it does now. And now it's restored to how it looked when the family all lived here, so we call it our largest artifact.
So to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Campbell House this year, my favorite thing we did was we installed reproduction wallpapers in the yellow and pink bedrooms. And so it's this really dramatic transformation if you've visited before, and especially if you look at before and after photos. The new wallpapers, they're not exact replicas. While we have really wonderful records about Campbell House, we actually don't have great large swatches of the original wallpapers, and we don't have photos that really give us enough information. But you can tell that they're pretty close, and they're based on vintage wallpapers. So they really give that feeling of, you know, this is what homes used to look like. You wouldn't walk into a home and see just a painted wall. There would be wallpaper. And so it really just warms those rooms up and helps you see them the way that the family saw them. We also, in addition to the wallpaper, brought in some new original furniture that's especially apparent in what we call the yellow bedroom, one of the main guest bedrooms. We brought in large pieces of furniture like a bureau and a couple of other pieces. In the 80s and 90s, we had this major restoration effort where you were rebuilding walls and doing major construction, and now the restoration effort continues on this smaller scale with things like wallpaper and furniture.
We're really fortunate. We have William Otis was the interior designer that worked with Kirtland Cutter to design the house, and we have his swatch book. He made meticulous notes about furniture and wallpaper and even sometimes where it was supposed to go, and it's been an invaluable resource for the restoration of the house to have this really concrete example of what would have been in some of these spaces.
One of the sort of magic secrets of Campbell House is that many things are things that the Campbells had here. Some things are not original to the Campbells, but they are original to the era and this neighborhood or this city or this region, and so they fit because of that. Some of them belong to other families of the time. And then we have things that aren't really either of those. And so things that kind of fit in but are more contemporary reproductions. This house is not being used for anything then as a historic house. So some of the other historic homes in this neighborhood and throughout the city are used as event spaces, or they have offices upstairs. And here, this house is being kept as a museum piece.
There's not a lot of historic houses in Spokane per se, but like the Glover Mansion has been open to the public, and like the Corbin Art Center. And so, I mean, there are some other from this era homes that have been used in different ways. I would say Campbell House is arguably one of the few being used quite as the historic museum like this in town, though.
There's a lot of myth making about Campbell House. So people will tell you, oh, I heard there's a secret passageway. And there aren't secret passageways in this house, much to my disappointment. You hear things about, stories that never happened here. It feels like an old, scary, spooky, haunted mansion, but only one family ever lived here. It even is kind of unique in that way among historic homes, in that it didn't go through multiple families or multiple generations. It was one family, one generation, and then became a museum.
Mostly we get the memories of people who haven't been here. Maybe they moved away and it was that third grade field trip when they were small, and they have not visited the house since. And that is always really fun to hear. And we get a lot of grandparents who are bringing grandkids. Everyone has been here and has these memories, and it makes it really fun to watch those family groups get here and share those stories together.